Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Limitless. We are on to speaker number two. And there she is. It's Jaimie Johnson. Jaimie is our resiliency coach, grief and resiliency. She's also a PCC mentor coach for coach training. And she is going to talk to you about filling your resiliency piggy bank today. So without further ado, Jaimie, welcome. Take
All
it away.
right. Awesome. Thank you so much, Kelly. I'm so excited to be here this morning. So I love talking about resiliency because it's one of those things that we all kind of know what it is, but we don't really know like how to implement it in our lives on a day-to-day basis. So just take a moment and think to yourself, like what does resiliency really mean to you? I'm guessing as you're thinking about it, you're thinking about the idea of like getting through difficult and challenging things. And of course, that is a major part of resiliency, of being able to move through things and being able to like get through hard situations. But there's when I actually like look at the definitions of resiliency, that's the first one that comes up is this ability to recover quickly from difficulties. And that's what we usually think of. But there's also another side of resiliency, which is the ability to bounce back into shape and have elasticity. And I really love that definition because resiliency isn't something that we have to wait until we're going through something hard in order to start cultivating. And it's something that we actually get to practice on a day to day basis. And when we look at that first definition of waiting until we're going through something hard, that means that we're just kind of like at the whim of when we need to be building resiliency. And so, what I'm going to talk to you about today is how we can actually start practicing resiliency in our lives every day instead of waiting for those hard things to show up in our life. So, I just take a second to and like think about a situation in your life where you really needed resilience to get through. This could be a loss, it could be a challenge in business or in your career, could be a breakup, could be like so many different things. And maybe it's just like maybe you have a chronic illness and you have to get through it. Yes, Rosella, I see your comment pop there. Last year, we all needed a lot of resilience last year because so many different things were coming at us and were outside of our control. And of course, like we've had to figure out a way to get through it, but the benefit of practicing resiliency on a day-to-day basis means that it's actually going to be a little bit easier when we need to go and work through these hard things or the other things that are coming up. I hate to just say like the hard things because it really is more than that. But chances are, as you're thinking about where resiliency has shown up in your life, you're thinking about hard things. But the other side of this coin is that you actually can use resiliency when it comes to things like having the bravery and the courage and the strength to go after the things that you desire. Because we all know that as much as we wish that those were like easy, fun things all the time, they are not. And chances are, if you're here hanging out with us in this group today, you're one of those people who has big dreams and big desires and you are constantly needing resiliency to keep going in those things because even when it's something exciting and fun or it's something that we really want, we're going to still hit those roadblocks where it doesn't feel good or it feels a little sticky. So really the idea is of practicing resiliency is to actually start implementing it on a day-to-day basis. And when we have this resiliency in our life, we aren't just preparing for those hard things, but we're also preparing for the good things and the things that are going to stretch us. And when we choose, especially for those of us who are here, we all are a little bit more in this realm of like choosing personal development and choosing growth. And when we actually decide to become a coach or an entrepreneur, or even just commit to a deeper level of personal growth, we are choosing to expand ourselves. And that's not always comfy. I wish it was. Like, honestly, so many times clients come to me and they're like, I just want to make it better. I just want to make it easy. And yes, of course, like we get to like make our lives easy. We get to like have the things that we want, but in so many ways, it's not that easy. We are going to run up against the stories that no longer fit us. We're going to have to face like our the upper limit syndrome. That's the word I'm looking for. Um, and actually like get real about the things that are holding us back. And as much as those are things that are going to help us grow, they're not always comfortable. And so when we are choosing this path, and really like all humans, but especially for those of us who are choosing this path, um, we are choosing this journey of constant up leveling. And that is where we need resilience, because without it, when we hit one of these roadblocks, it's going to feel yucky and we're going to get stuck and we're not going to want to keep pushing through it, because and that's when we start this negative spiral of thoughts, right? Of like, I'm not good enough, like this is too hard, I'm never going to get there. And when we notice those things, that's when we really get to take a break and step back and look at how we can incorporate more resiliency into this path that we're on. Because of course, like up leveling has so many benefits, and like we're choosing it for a reason, but it comes with this level of discomfort. And one of my things as a coach, like I teach a lot around grief and resiliency. And one of my biggest things is learning to live in this messy chaos of life. We all want it to just be clear cut, easy. Like, I have a plan. We're just going to check off the steps. I know for me as a recovering perfectionist, that is 100% the way I wish life worked. But unfortunately, it has shown me over and over again, and I've also seen that with all of my clients over and over again, that that's just not the way it works. And so when we actually lean into this discomfort and we actually choose to be making ourselves like a little bit uncomfortable and stretching ourselves a little bit every day, that's when we are able to start building this resiliency piggy bank. For example, let's just say, like, if you're someone who maybe feels uncomfortable having hard conversations, or they feel like confrontational, this is totally me before coaching. Um, and thankfully, it's one of those skills that I've learned really well as I have gone through my own personal journey. But if you feel uncomfortable having those conversations, if you imagine just waiting until there's a really important hard conversation that you have to have and you're so uncomfortable about it and you don't want to do it, that conversation is now, it seems like, impossible to have. The alternative and the idea of building resiliency is that instead of waiting until we have no other choice to either have the conversation and sort of like get through it, or in some cases it's just like we have no choice but to do these hard things in order to like get through. So an example for this would be, if you are not used to having those uncomfortable conversations, you can start to practice resiliency and start to fill up this piggy bank by having smaller hard conversations, or not even hard conversations, but conversations that make you a little uncomfortable, that give you that little bit of a like, I don't want to do this. And practicing those over time instead of shying away from them. And so that could look like asking, someone, actually, like, sometimes it's a simple, like, this is a silly example, but it happens so often. Like, someone asks you what you want for dinner and you know what you want for dinner, but you don't want to be like, you don't want to be like selfish and say like, no, you just pick, it's fine. And so sometimes it's as simple as like stating your desires and asking for what you want or what you need. And obviously that's a really small example, but the more that we practice having these conversations, the more we practice like bringing up things that we need to bring up, or facing the things that are uncomfortable. Sometimes it's like as silly as like making an uncomfortable phone call, or doing like going to the gym, right? Like, we build resilience at the gym by showing up at the gym. And so if we just are always like sidestepping these things and trying to get through them, when we actually need them, then it's like, well, crap, I can't go to the gym today and like lift this really heavy weight because I haven't been lifting any weights for a year. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about filling your resiliency piggy bank. So I love this visual of actually having a piggy bank. I don't know, mine like is, well, I guess pink, you guys can tell, is one of my favorite colors, but mine is like hot pink in my visual here. Um, of having this piggy bank, and every day you're just choosing to stretch yourself a little bit more and adding more coins to that piggy bank. And that way, as you are doing these things, right? Like, I love this visual, but in reality, we're collecting these things that feel a little bit easier every time we do them. And then
Mhm.
when we actually need them, we have this piggy bank to go back to and lean on. And clearly, like even with the examples I'm talking about, you can see the benefits, right? Like if you're used to having little like harder conversations, then when the big conversation comes, the one that's really important, the one that you really want to like take seriously, you can go into it with trust and confidence in yourself and a little more strength and like knowing that you can do this. And it's the same thing with the gym. Like if you're going to the gym every day, you're stretching yourself, you're working through that, then when something happens and you're like, yeah, I want to go on this adventure, like that takes a lot of like physical resilience, let's go. And you actually can say yes to the things that you want in your life. And I think that's really the magic of resiliency, is the ability to say yes to the things you want and to also move more quickly through the things that you don't want. So the more that we practice resiliency, the easier it gets to like keep bouncing back. And I love that like elasticity example in the definition of being able to snap back to ourselves and move forward from there. So in your journal, there's some prompts in there, and they all relate to this idea of the resiliency piggy bank. So I would encourage you all to take a few minutes sometime today and really spend some time thinking about where resiliency is showing up for you and where you can also continue to cultivate it, continue to fill your resiliency piggy bank so that you're building this thing. And, you know, I think Rosella said at the beginning, right? Like this year has required so much resiliency from all of us. But that also probably means that in some ways we've been filling our piggy bank, but we've also been depleting our piggy bank because we've had to use those things like way more than we had expected. So as you're going through those journal prompts, like take some time also to look at where have you depleted your piggy bank and where do you need to practice like refilling it so that you can feel great. Um, so that's what I have to say about resiliency today. Of course, like as a grief and resiliency coach, I teach about this stuff all the time. So if you want to hear more about it, you can always connect with me online. And I'm always here around IGC as well. So I'm so excited that you're all here.
Totally. And Jaimie's info, if you want to connect with her, is in her page in the workbook. I believe that's page 6. Yes, page 6, FYI specifically. You can get in touch with Jaimie about that. So let's go into some Q&A here. Put your questions in the chat. If you want to ask your question verbally, you can raise your hand and I can unmute you. If you are, oh, we had somebody taking me up on that offer real quick. Who has their hand? Rosella. Okay, Rosella. Talk away and see if we can hear you.
All right, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we
All
can.
right, I'm doing the thing I'm not supposed to do. I'm in the car, but I didn't want to miss this live. I had a question, and it's really about, and this is where okay, here's the question. Culturally, and not just racial, but socioeconomically, right, ethnically, we know that there are people who that ability to bounce back is not necessarily there if their life has been a constant struggle as it relates to resiliency and grief. And so I guess I'm wondering when working with folks, because I do work with folks, especially now I'm doing a lot of work post-disaster things, right? I guess I'm curious, Jaimie, just how do you talk about, work with, understand communities where resiliency it's seemingly non-existent, like I think about the slinky metaphor, like back in the day having a slinky, but the slinky never couldn't go back to the coil because it never was coiled to begin with. So I guess the question is just around resiliency and populations or communities that have suffered tragedy after tragedy. How does one coach with support engage in that space?
Yeah, I think that's such an important question, Rosella. And it's a really important, I love that you brought it here too, because so many times when we as coaches talk about topics, we talk about them from like our own lens. But there are a lot of times where the situations are different. And so in this case, like I guess for me, like I know that everyone has the ability to be resilient. However, it's very valid to say that not all of us are taught to be resilient in the same ways. And I guess what I would say, I'm sure that there's a like way more of this conversation that we could get into than I could answer on this Q&A. But I think as a coach, like the really important thing here is to go into those conversations knowing that not everyone has that same ability. And sometimes helping your clients build resiliency might look like the smallest step to helping them start rebuilding that control in their life and learning how to like trust that side of themselves. And so it could be like as simple as setting goals that are really easy for them to achieve so that they can start seeing that progress and building that resiliency themselves. But I think that the real key though is to always keep your coach hat on and to never just assume that your clients have this skill already. Hopefully that answers your question, and I'm happy to, like, that's a really important one and I'm happy to chat more about it, but outside of like, can't fit it all in this little 10 minutes.
Yeah, that one's a nuanced case by case kind of situation too, because everyone's relationship with resiliency is very different. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think like Roselle also hit on it, like it's important to, it's obviously like the way that we are raised and the cultures and the situations that we grow up in impact that a lot, but also like the things that we've experienced in our life impact that a lot too. When people have gone through really big things that require a lot of resiliency, or maybe have tapped out all of the resiliency that they have, then like that becomes like a little bit different story than just saying like, yeah, keep practicing every day. Like it might get to a deeper level where they need more support around that.
Totally. Let me check and make sure if we've got any questions on Facebook. Okay, so I actually have kind of a follow-up question for you around that a little bit. You just mentioned there like a little bit more of a support system. Like what is your thoughts about how like a support team comes into play when it comes to building up your resiliency?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think building a community and building a support team is one of the fastest ways to help yourself build resilience, because often even when we are building this resiliency for ourselves and we are figuring out how to overcome things, we all still have those little voices inside that are like telling us how we're not doing it right or we're not enough and all of that. And so for me and for a lot of the clients that I've worked with, building that community has been a huge part of that, because then when you are struggling, you're able to actually check in and say, hey, like, can you just remind me of these things? Or you're over time, like your community is also going to start reminding you on their own, because you've built that space. And so I think having a community and having a place that you can go to when things are hard is so important. And sometimes that looks like talking it out or venting, but sometimes it also just means like, hey, this thing's kind of hard. Like, can you just be here for me as I go through this? And honestly, like part of resiliency comes from being able to ask that question as well, like asking people for what you need and asking them to support you. Mm-hmm. So it's really twofold, like building the community, but then also asking them for help when you need it.
Yeah. It's bringing me back to what you were saying about having those conversations that can make you feel a little uncomfortable. And that's probably a common one for a lot of us, like asking for the thing we need can feel uncomfortable. That act alone can help build your resiliency is what I'm hearing in that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where it's important. Like, I mean, I think it's kind of a funny thing to like the idea of like saying what you want for dinner. But I've had too many conversations around that topic even that people are like, oh no, I don't do that. And it's like when you're able to ask for that, then it gets a little bit easier to like ask someone to support you when you actually like need support as well. Like the more we state our desires and needs.
Totally. Yeah. So check in the Q&A. Okay. I've got another question here for you. Like,
okay.
Tell me, like, personally for you, like, what are some of your favorite ways to do this, to add little coins to your personal resiliency piggy bank?
Yeah, the first one that comes to mind for me is first off, I'm a book nerd and so I love like personal development books and like learning about myself. And for me, like that often fills my resiliency piggy bank because when I read things about personal development or I learn more about myself, it's like all of these little coins of realizing like, first off, I'm not alone. Like anytime you read a personal development book, like chances are you're going to be like, oh, like this, I can relate to this, or someone else gets me. So that's one of my like big things. One of the other things that comes to mind though is also just like, honestly, like the example I used of like choosing to have hard conversations and ask for what I need is one of my favorites because like I said, before coach training and kind of in my previous life, that was a really hard one for me. So it's still something that like I consciously do every day. So those are like a couple that like come top of mind. And I think the third one that's coming to my mind that's a little bit off, like it seems a little bit weird as an idea of like filling my resiliency piggy bank, but it's actually celebrating the wins. So when I add coins to my resiliency piggy bank or when I go through hard things, I try to make sure that I stop and actually celebrate those achievements and that process instead of just blowing past it.
Oh my gosh, that one resonates with me so much because it's funny, as a coach, there's probably not as many questions that consistently make people squirm as how are you celebrating this? It seems like such a simple question, but for some reason it makes so many people just get squirmy. And I think it's because we're not used to celebrating things. We're like on to the next thing. Like when we do it, check, what's next? And so, that's such an important piece of resiliency. I hadn't made that connection. Like celebration adds to this resiliency piggy bank, but absolutely, I can see that for sure.
Yeah. And I think when you celebrate too, like it kind of gives your brain and your body a little permission to like keep doing the thing that's hard. So like, because otherwise we're just like, it seems a little like weird. We're like, I'm just going to constantly make myself do hard things. But if you don't celebrate it, then it's like, well, that kind of sucks.
Yeah.
So
living in a state of just uncomfortable. Yeah.
Exactly. So having that space to celebrate can make a huge shift there.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much, Jaimie, for coming here and sharing your thoughts about resiliency and helping us see how we can fill that up a little bit more from day to day and not just when, we really need a high alert situation. So thank you. If you want to get a hold of Jaimie for anything, as I mentioned before, you can see her contact information on page 6 in the workbook. If you're sitting here thinking, how do I become a resiliency coach? You're in luck. You know people, wink, wink. Like coach training is in enrollment for Inner Glow Circles coach training. We start on the 31st. So if you're curious and you want to talk about it, I'm going to put a link in the chat here. You can book a call with Katie or Liv and talk about coach training, if it's a good fit for you, if that's the next best step for you. Coach training can help fill your resiliency piggy bank. It did for me. It made me a much more resilient person learning those coaching skills. It just really did. So think about it. Talk to Katie and Liv. There's a discounted rate for all of you here attending Limitless, by the way. So more on that in your workbook. And cool. Thank you, Jaimie. Up next, we're going to take a little 4-minute break here. And up next will be Kendall Daly. Kendall will be talking about self-love, and listening to your heart's song specifically, and what that means to you. So take a little breather and meet me back here at the top of the hour.